I welcome today's very timely announcement, but there is still a huge amount of work to be done in helping those who are caught in the leasehold trap, like many of my constituents in Haywood and Middleton. Now, I first became aware of this issue around Christmas time last year when I was contacted by my constituent, Linda Barnes, who told me that her house, which she had bought new from Taylor Wimpey in 2011 for £147,000, had a ground rent which doubled every 10 years, which had been sold on by Taylor Wimpey to E&J Estates, and also that she had been quoted a price of £35,000 to buy the lease before it doubled. Very soon after that, I heard from another constituent, Jonathan, who had bought a house from Countryside Properties in 2010, using the government's HomeBuy Direct initiative, later renamed Help to Buy. Jonathan said that he had been made aware that the development was to be leasehold and that an annual ground rent of £200 was payable to the owner of the land, Countryside Properties. 6 months after he moved in, Jonathan received a letter informing him that the freehold had been sold on to a company called Tuscola Ltd, based in the British Virgin Islands. He was quoted over £6,000 to buy the freehold. He also discovered a doubling clause in his lease, which meant that by 2055 the ground rent would be £1,600 a year. And this is causing him a great deal of concern, because by the time he reaches retirement age, his ground rent will be unaffordable and will make his home unsaleable. As Jonathan said, and I quote, "Considering the significant cost of new homes, one would have thought that the last thing one should worry about is the land the house sits on, and that it can seemingly be sold on from underneath you." I most certainly will.
Giving way. And although the property companies may not have done anything illegal, it is morally wrong what they have done. They know full well what those products were. They were making an extra buck on a financial product, and they didn't give a damn about what happened to those people that they sold those properties to.
I thank my humble friend for that comment, and I totally agree with him, and I will expand on that point in my speech later on. Now, I've been contacted by very many of Linda and Jonathan's neighbours, and they all tell the same story, that they were encouraged to use the developer's choice of solicitor when they bought their homes, that they were not informed of the doubling clause, and that the prices they are being quoted to buy the freehold are simply unaffordable. Many residents are quite rightly angry that when the developers sold off the freehold to a property investment company without first consulting with the homeowners and offering them the first chance of purchase. Many pointed out that the lease on their houses is for 250 years. And if the ground rent doubles every 15 years, that would mean the ground rent would be £13 million by the end of the lease. And if the government does just one thing, it must ban this exponential growth in ground rent.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that some honourable members will be familiar with the concept of grains of rice on a chessboard, with the number of grains doubling on each successive square. By the time the 64th and last square is reached, the number of grains of rice is a staggering 20-digit number, more than 18 quintillion, or 2 to the power of 64 minus 1. Clearly, any further attempts by developers to use this deceptive piece of mathematical trickery must be made illegal. One couple wrote to me to complain that when they bought their property from the developers, they actually posed for photographs and recommended the company to other prospective buyers, and this was posted on the developer's website. This couple now say, "We would very much welcome being able now to express our very different views and to tell the truth about you as developers on your website. We doubt very much you will give us that opportunity. You have turned what should be our happy home into a very expensive prison." Now, research from the House of Commons Library also highlights that leaseholders may be required to seek the freeholder's consent before carrying out alterations, as many honourable members have already referred to. But I do think that the publicity surrounding this leasehold scandal may have actually emboldened some unscrupulous landlords to make unreasonable demands on homeowners. And I have an example of that in my own constituency. Just recently, I and my staff have been dealing with issues raised by residents who had received letters from a company named the Wimpey Group, asking for money for retrospective ground rents and for payments for alterations such as dormer windows and extensions. Now, these homeowners had bought their properties after these alterations had been made. In one case, the homeowner actually discovered that the previous owner had in fact paid the landlord for the alterations to the home when they were carried out in 1978. The current landlord, Wimpey, who had either bought or inherited the freehold, had obviously not checked if payment had been received in respect of the alterations, but had just sent out the letters demanding payment regardless, something that looked to me very much like a fishing expedition. The behaviour of this company, Wimpey of Duckingfield, Cheshire, is outrageous. They have told me that they will only deal with either me or a solicitor, but not both, seemingly missing the point that I can act on behalf of any of my constituents, regardless of whether or not my constituents are using a solicitor. I have written to the Housing Minister about this case and have so far not received a reply. As the Housing Minister is here, I would be grateful if, in his concluding remarks, he will say what action he will take to prevent these landlords acting in such an arbitrary manner. Their actions are causing a great deal of distress to my constituents, many of whom are elderly, and very worried by the prospect of having to pay these large bills. And I hope that in addition to addressing the issues raised here today, that the Minister will be able to give my constituents some reassurance that action will be taken against the sharp practice of companies like Wimpey, and that my constituents may then enjoy a peaceful, relaxed and very happy Christmas in their own homes. Hey.